The sun was shining brightly over the busy park in the San Fernando Valley. It was one of those afternoons where the air felt warm and the sky was a perfect, clear blue. Families were out enjoying their day, kids were laughing on the playground, and the smell of fresh cut grass hung in the breeze. In the middle of all this activity, a small, scruffy dog was living the best moment of his life. To him, the world was just one big, happy place because he was with his person. The dog didn't have a fancy pedigree. He looked like a mix of a few different breeds, with fur that was a dusty brown and patches of white on his paws. His ears were too big for his head, and they flopped around when he ran. He wasn't a show dog, but he had a heart that was pure gold. His tail never stopped wagging. It thumped back and forth constantly, a metronome of joy, because he trusted his owner completely. In his eyes, this person was everything. They were the giver of food, the source of belly rubs, and the center of the universe. They walked together along the winding paths of the park. The dog would trot ahead a few steps, then stop to look back, making sure his person was still there. Every time he looked back, he saw his friend, and his tail would give a happy little wiggle. They stopped near a wooden bench under a large oak tree. The man sat down, and the dog immediately sat at his feet, leaning against the man's leg. He felt safe. He felt loved. He had no idea that this normal afternoon was about to turn into the hardest day of his life. The man reached down and patted the dog's head. His hand felt rough but familiar. The dog closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, soaking up the affection. But then the man's hand lingered a little too long. He stood up and tied the dog's leash to the slat of the bench. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes, when the owner wanted to buy a water or check a phone message, he would ask the dog to stay. The dog was a good boy. He knew how to stay. He sat down proudly, chest puffed out, ready to wait for however long it took. However, something felt different this time. The air around them seemed to get heavy. The man pulled a phone out of his pocket and started talking. His voice was low, sharp. He wasn't talking to the dog. He was talking to someone else, and he sounded stressed. The dog watched him, head cocked to the side, his floppy ears twitching. He didn't understand the words, but he could sense the tension. He let out a small whine just to remind his owner that he was there. The man ignored the whine. He finished his call, looked around the park as if checking to see if anyone was watching, and then took a step back. The dog's tail gave a hopeful wag. Maybe they were playing a game? Maybe they were going to run? But the man didn't say run, he didn't say walk. He didn't say anything at all. The man looked down at the dog. For a split second, his face softened. He looked sad, tired, and maybe even a little guilty. But it passed quickly. He turned his back. The dog froze. His tail stopped wagging. Usually when they walked, he followed right by the owner's heel. He started to stand up, ready to follow, but the leash pulled tight. He was stuck. The dog watched the man walk away. He expected him to turn around. He expected him to laugh and say, "Just kidding, let's go." But the man kept walking. He walked faster, putting distance between himself and the bench. Panic started to rise in the dog's chest. He let out a bark. It wasn't a loud bark. It was a confused, questioning bark. "Where are you going?" it seemed to say. The man didn't turn. The dog pulled against the leash, his claws scratching the concrete path. He just wanted to be by his side. He didn't understand that he was being left behind on purpose. The man reached a car parked at the curb. He opened the door. The dog sat back down, his heart beating fast. Surely this was just a mistake. He's getting the car to bring me home, the dog thought. But the man got in the car alone. He closed the door with a heavy thud that echoed through the park. The engine started. The dog stood up again, straining against the collar. The car pulled away from the curb. The man didn't look out the back window. He didn't wave goodbye. He just drove off, disappearing into the traffic of the city. The dog was left alone in the sudden silence. He stood by the bench for a long time, his eyes fixed on the spot where the car had vanished. He waited for the sound of the engine returning. He waited for the familiar face to appear around the corner. A young couple walked by, laughing and holding hands. The dog perked up, his eyes hopeful, thinking it was his owner. but as they got closer, his tail drooped. It wasn't them. Minutes turned into an hour. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, stretching shadows across the grass. The park started to empty out. The mothers with strollers left. The joggers finished their runs. The air grew cooler. The dog shivered, but he refused to leave his spot. He was a loyal friend. If he stayed here, his owner would come back. He had to. He lay down on the dusty ground near the bench, resting his chin on his paws. His big ears flopped against the dirt. People walked past him, glancing down. Some felt sorry for him, but they kept walking. Others assumed his owner was just in the restroom or buying a snack nearby. Nobody knew that he had been abandoned. Nobody knew that the person he trusted most in the world had just driven away and never planned to come back. As the sky turned from blue to orange, and then to a deep purple, the dog's hope began to fade. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He was thirsty. He was lonely. But the worst part was the confusion. He replayed the events of the day in his mind. What did he do wrong? Was he bad? Did he chew on something he shouldn't have? He tried to be a good boy. He just wanted to go home. A squirrel ran across the path nearby. Usually this would be the most exciting thing ever. He would have given anything to chase it. Today he didn't even lift his head. He just watched the empty road, his eyes sad and filled with a depth of emotion that no animal should have to feel. The streetlights flickered on in the parking lot, buzzing softly. The dog was just a small silhouette in the dark, tied to a bench. Waiting for a ghost, the park became quiet and a little spooky. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves near his feet. The dog curled into a tight ball to keep warm. He missed the warmth of the car. He missed the sound of the key in the door. He missed the voice that called his name. He closed his eyes, listening to the distant sounds of the city, hoping that the next car he heard pulling up would be the one that would take him back to where he belonged. But for now, the night was long, the bench was hard, and he was completely alone. The morning sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a pale light on the park bench. It should have been a warm comfort, but to the small dog, the light felt harsh and exposing. He lifted his head slowly, his neck stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. For a brief, wonderful second, he forgot where he was. He stretched his front legs out, expecting to feel the soft carpet of his living room or the familiar blanket in his bed. But instead of carpet, his paws brushed against cold concrete. Instead of the smell of fresh coffee and breakfast, he smelled the damp odor of morning dew and trash. He sat up and looked around wildly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The man had to be there. He just had to be. Maybe he was hiding behind a tree. Maybe he was buying a newspaper. The dog let out a high-pitched bark that echoed in the empty park. He waited, he listened. A car drove by in the distance, and his ears perked up, his tail giving a tiny, hopeful thump against the bench. But the car didn't stop. It kept driving, taking its driver to a job, to a family, to a life somewhere else. Hours passed, and the park began to fill with people again. Joggers ran past with headphones on, lost in their own worlds. Dog walkers passed by with happy, healthy pets on leashes. The dog watched them, his eyes wide with confusion. He stood up and wagged his tail as a golden retriever walked by. He wanted to say hello. He wanted to play. But the retriever just looked at him strangely, sniffing the air, before being pulled away by its owner. The dog realized something terrible. He didn't smell like a beloved pet anymore. He smelled like the bench. He smelled like loneliness. Eventually, a park worker in a green uniform came by with a broom. He saw the dog sitting there, tethered to the bench by a leash that was now dragging on the ground. The worker didn't see a loyal friend waiting for his master. He just saw a stray that needed to move along. He clapped his hands loudly and shouted, "Go on! Get out of here!" The dog flinched, cowering low to the ground. He wasn't used to being yelled at. He scrambled backward, the leash tangling around his legs. In his panic, he twisted and pulled, and finally the old clip gave way. He was free, but freedom felt terrifying. He ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just ran away from the angry voice and the broom. He scrambled out of the park and found himself on the sidewalk of a busy street. The world here was loud and chaotic. Cars roared past like metal monsters, their tires hissing on the asphalt. The wind they created blew dust into the dog's eyes. He huddled close to a brick wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. Hunger began to gnaw at his belly like a sharp pain. It was a feeling he had never really known before. Back at his home, his bowl was always full. Now, there was nothing. He sniffed at the ground, smelling old gum and dirt. He saw a crumpled wrapper blowing in the wind and chased it, hoping it might be food, but it was just paper. He had to learn quickly that the city was full of smells that tricked you. The mouth-watering scent of fried chicken came from a fast-food restaurant, but when he crawled near the back door, all he found was a locked metal gate and a worker who shouted at him to scram. The day turned into night again, and the temperature dropped. The dog's fur, once soft and clean, was now matted with dirt and burrs. He walked for miles, his paws cracking and sore from the hot pavement during the day and the cold concrete at night. He missed the soft grass of the park. He missed the feeling of a hand on his head. Every time he saw a person walking alone, he would follow them for a block, his tail tucked between his legs, hoping they were the one who would save him. But nobody looked down. Nobody stopped. To the busy people of the city, he was just part of the scenery, a shadow moving along the gutter. A few days passed, then a week. The dog was changing. The spark in his eyes was dimming. He stopped wagging his tail at everyone who passed by. He learned that people could be mean. He learned to dodge the feet of hurrying commuters. He learned to sleep under parked cars to keep the dew off his fur. He scavenged for scraps behind dumpsters, fighting with raccoons and other stray cats for a half-eaten hamburger bun. He won some fights and lost others. Bearing a small scratch on his nose from a particularly angry cat, he was no longer the happy, goofy dog from the park. He was a survivor. But deep down, beneath the dirt and the fear, he was still the same dog. He still had a heart that wanted to love. He just didn't know how anymore. He felt forgotten. He felt like the whole world had decided he wasn't worth keeping. The weight of that rejection was heavier than the hunger or the cold. One afternoon, the smells of the neighborhood changed. Instead of just garbage and exhaust, he smelled something different, something rich and savory. It was the smell of food being cooked in large quantities. His stomach gave a rumble so loud it hurt. He lifted his nose to the air, trying to track the scent. It led him away from the busy main streets and into a quieter area where large trucks were parked and cables snaked along the ground. He didn't know what a movie set was. He didn't know about lights, cameras, or action. He just knew that there was food there, and he was desperate. He moved slowly, staying in the shadows of the alleyways, his body low to the ground. He watched people rushing around in strange costumes, holding coffee cups and talking on headsets. It was a confusing, noisy place, but the smell drew him in like a magnet. He crept closer, his eyes darting around for danger. He saw a table piled high with trays of fruit, sandwiches, and meats. His mouth watered. But there were too many people. He couldn't just run up and grab something. He found a spot behind a large equipment crate and curled up, watching. He waited for a moment when no one was looking. He was just about to make a dash for a fallen piece of fruit when he heard footsteps approaching his hiding spot. He froze, pressing his belly against the dirt, ready to be yelled at again. He closed his eyes tight, bracing for the worst. But this time, the footsteps didn't pass by. They stopped right in front of him. The dog squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the blow. He was used to it now. He knew the routine: a shout, a kick, or a spray of water to make him run away. He pressed his belly flat against the dirt, making himself as small as possible, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. But the heavy blow never came. Instead, a deep, quiet voice cut through the air. "It's okay," the voice said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was gentle, like the way people talk to babies or to frightened birds. The dog opened one eye, then the other. Standing in front of him was a man dressed in dark clothes. He wasn't holding a broom. He wasn't holding a stick. His hands were empty, hanging loosely by his sides. The man didn't tower over the dog, shouting and waving his arms. Instead, he did something the dog had never seen a stranger do before. He squatted down. He lowered his body until he was sitting on his heels, bringing his eyes level with the dog's. This made him look smaller, less threatening. The dog stopped trembling for a split second, confused. He sniffed the air. The man didn't smell like old trash or exhaust fumes. He smelled like fresh laundry, soap, and something warm and safe. The man stayed very still. He didn't reach out to grab the dog. He just sat there looking at him with eyes that were soft and sad. He looked at the matted fur, the burrs stuck to the dog's legs, and the ribs showing through the dirty coat. He didn't see a pest. He saw a life that was hurting. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" the man whispered. He tilted his head slightly, watching the dog's reaction. The dog let out a low, warning growl. It was a weak sound, more of a whimper than a threat. He was scared to trust. His tail was tucked so far between his legs it was touching his belly. He remembered the bench. He remembered the car driving away. He remembered the cold nights and the angry people. Why was this man being nice? What did he want? The man heard the growl and didn't get mad. He didn't stand up or walk away. He actually smiled a little, just a small curve of his lips. He slowly turned his hands over, palms up, showing the dog that he wasn't hiding anything. It was a universal sign of peace. "I know," the man said softly, answering the growl. "You've had a rough time. I won't hurt you." The man's patience was incredible. Most people would have tried to grab the leash or chase the dog away after a few seconds. But this man acted like he had all the time in the world. He sat down on the dusty ground, crossing his legs. He ignored the noise of the movie set behind him, the people shouting orders, the rumble of generators, the commotion of the crew. Right now, the only thing that mattered to him was the scared, dirty creature in front of him. Slowly, the man moved his hand forward. He moved it inch by inch, giving the dog plenty of time to back away if he wanted to. The dog watched the hand. He wanted to snap at it, to tell the world to leave him alone, but he was so tired. He was so lonely. The hand stopped a few inches from his nose and waited. The dog leaned forward, his nose twitching. He sniffed the man's fingers. They smelled clean. The dog remembered what it felt like to be touched with love. He remembered the chin scratches and the ear rubs from his old life. A wave of sadness washed over him, but mixed with it was a tiny spark of hope. He couldn't help himself. He leaned his head forward just a fraction more and pressed, his nose against the man's palm. The man didn't snatch his hand away. He didn't pat the dog roughly. He just let his fingers rest there, letting the dog get used to his touch. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're a good boy." Hearing those words broke something inside the dog. He had been called bad and pest and get out of here for so long. To hear "good boy" again made his tail give a tiny, hesitant thump against the ground. It wasn't a wag, not yet, but it was a start. The man saw the tail move. He smiled again, and this time the smile reached his eyes. He slowly moved his hand up to the dog's head, scratching gently behind the ears. The dog closed his eyes. The feeling was electric. It washed away the dirt and the cold for just a moment. He leaned into the hand, pushing his head harder against the man's palm, silently begging for more. "Don't stop. Please don't stop." The man moved his hand down the dog's neck, feeling the bumps of his spine. He frowned slightly, feeling how thin the dog was. He checked for a collar, pushing aside the matted fur around the neck. There was nothing. No collar. No tags. "No, just a red mark where a collar might have been a long time ago." The man sighed, a heavy sound. He looked around the set, then back at the dog. The dog looked up at him, his brown eyes filled with a desperate question. "Asterisk, are you the one? Are you the one who will take me home?" Asterisk, the man seemed to understand the question. He looked at the dog with a deep sense of seriousness. He didn't make a promise he couldn't keep right away, but he didn't look away either. He kept scratching the dog's ear, his touch grounding the dog, making him feel real again. "You're hungry," the man stated. It wasn't a question. He could see the dog's hip bones jutting out. He could see the way the dog's eyes were glued to his hands. Not out of fear anymore, but out of hope for food, the man stood up slowly. The dog flinched, his muscles tensing to run. He thought the nice moment was over. He thought the man was going to leave him there, just like the owner at the bench. But the man didn't leave. He pointed a finger at the dog. "Stay," he said, not like a command, but like a request. "Wait here." The man turned and walked toward a table covered in white cloths. It was the food table the dog had smelled earlier. The dog watched him go, his heart beating fast. Every instinct told him to run away while he could, to hide before the man came back with security guards. But his feet wouldn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the man's back. The dog watched as the man picked up a paper plate. He talked to one of the people serving the food, pointing back toward the crates where the dog was hiding. He didn't look like he was calling the pound. He didn't look angry. He looked like he was on a mission. He loaded the plate with some turkey, a little bit of plain hamburger bun, and a bowl of water. The dog's mouth watered instantly. He forgot about running. He forgot about the danger. All he could think about was the plate in the man's hands. The man came back, walking slowly so he wouldn't spill the water. He walked right past the spot where he had been sitting and crouched down again, right in front of the dog. He placed the plate on the ground. Then he placed the bowl of water down next to it. "Here," the man said quietly. "Eat." He didn't touch the food. He didn't try to pet the dog while he ate. He just sat back on his heels, giving the dog space. He respected the dog enough to let him eat in peace. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in a long time. The dog looked at the food, then up at the man. The man nodded, encouraging him. The dog didn't need to be told twice. He lowered his head and attacked the food. He ate so fast he almost choked, the taste of real meat exploding in his mouth. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. When he finished the meat, he licked the plate clean, his rough tongue scraping against the paper. Then he lapped up the water, drinking until his belly felt full for the first time in weeks. When he was done, he lifted his head. He felt better. He felt stronger. He looked at the man. The man was still sitting there, watching him with a quiet smile. The dog took a step forward. He didn't bite. He didn't growl. He gently nudged his wet nose against the man's knee. It was a thank you. It was a surrender. The dog was telling him, "I'm yours. Please take me with you, *." The man felt the wet nose press against his jeans. It was a small gesture, just a gentle bump, but it felt heavy with meaning. It was trust. It was a surrender. The dog was telling him that he had nothing left to give. No more fight left in him, and he was putting his life in the man's hands. The man didn't hesitate. He reached down and ran his hand along the dog's back, feeling the bumps of the spine and the harsh texture of the matted fur. He could feel the dog's heart beating rapidly against his ribs, like a trapped bird in a cage. "It's okay now," the man whispered again, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." He didn't just say the words. He meant them. He looked around the busy movie set. Cameras were rolling on the other side of the lot, and people were rushing back and forth with cables and lights. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of shouting and machinery. But here, in this small corner behind the equipment crates, it was quiet. The man knew he couldn't leave the dog here. If he walked away to finish his work, the dog might be chased off by security or wander back into the dangerous streets. He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't let that happen. He looked down at the dog's neck. There was no collar, just the red mark where one used to be. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen, looking for a number. But then he stopped. He put the phone away. He realized he didn't need to make a call to a shelter. He didn't need to ask permission from anyone. He made a decision right there, standing in the dust and the noise. He was going to take care of this himself. "Stay with me," he said to the dog. He looked around and spotted a piece of soft cotton rope lying near a pile of gear. He picked it up and tested it between his fingers. It wasn't a fancy leash, but it would work. He looped it gently around the dog's neck, being incredibly careful not to tighten it too much. He made a loose knot, giving the dog plenty of room to breathe comfortably. The dog flinched slightly at the feeling of the rope around his neck, scared of being trapped again. Old memories of the park bench flashed in his mind. But when he looked up and saw the man's calm face, he relaxed. This rope wasn't for tying him to a cold bench to wait forever. It was for keeping him close. "Come on," the man said softly, giving the lightest tug on the rope. The dog stood up. His legs were shaky and weak from hunger, but he followed. They walked out from behind the crates and into the open. The noise of the set hit them instantly, the shouts of the director, the hum of the generators, the heavy thud of boots on the ground. The environment was bright and loud, a sensory overload for a creature used to hiding in shadows. The dog ducked his head, his tail tucking under his belly again. He was overwhelmed. The world was too big, too loud, and too scary. The man noticed this immediately. He stopped walking and turned to face the dog. He didn't pull on the rope. He stepped in front of the dog, using his own body as a shield. He blocked out the crew members walking by, the bright lights, and the chaos of the set. He crouched down again, putting himself between the dog and the scary world. He placed a hand on the dog's shoulder, grounding him. "Just look at me," the man said. "Ignore them." "Look at me," the dog focused on the man's face. He saw the kindness there. He saw the patience. He took a deep breath and stopped trembling. Slowly, they moved forward again. The man walked at a slow, easy pace, keeping the dog close to his leg. Every time someone walked too close or a cart rattled by, the man would subtly shift his position, guiding the dog out of the way, protecting him from getting kicked or stepped on. It wasn't a dramatic rescue with sirens and flashing lights. It was a quiet, protective walk. It was the kind of care that spoke louder than words. They passed a group of crew members who were eating lunch and laughing. One of them pointed a sandwich at the dog. "Hey, is that a stray?" he asked, looking a bit annoyed that a dirty dog was near the food. "Someone call animal control?" The man stopped. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just looked at the crew member, his face serious and calm. There was a power in his look that made the man stop chewing. "He's with me," the actor said simply. His voice was quiet, but it was firm. It was a statement of fact. This dog wasn't a stray anymore. He had an advocate. He had someone in his corner. The crew member shrugged, looking confused, and went back to his sandwich. The man gave the rope a gentle, reassuring tug. The dog looked up at him with wide eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. He felt claimed. He felt like he belonged to someone again. They reached the edge of the set where the cars were parked. The man led the dog toward a sleek, black car that sat shining in the sun. He opened the passenger door. The dog hesitated. He stopped dead in his tracks. He remembered the last time he got into a car, the time his owner drove away and never came back. The fear gripped his heart. He planted his feet on the pavement, not wanting to get in. He couldn't go through that pain again. The man saw the hesitation. He didn't force the dog. He didn't push him or drag him. He stood by the open door, waiting patiently. He reached out his hand, palm up, inviting the dog to take a step forward. He seemed to know exactly what the dog was thinking. He sensed the fear of abandonment. "It's different this time," the man promised, his voice almost a whisper. "I promise you." He knelt down on one knee, right there on the hot asphalt, and looked the dog in the eye. He didn't break contact. He let the dog see his soul. He let the dog see that he was a man who kept his promises. "You're not going back there," the man said firmly. "You're coming with me." Something in the man's voice made the dog's fear melt away. Maybe it was the certainty in his tone. Maybe it was just that the dog was too tired to be scared anymore. He took a hesitant step forward. Then another. He sniffed the leather seat of the car. It smelled clean. It smelled new. It didn't smell like the bench. The man helped him up, lifting him gently by the scruff of the neck, not to hurt him, but to support him. The dog jumped in and landed on the soft seat. It was the most comfortable thing he had felt in weeks. The man closed the door softly, shutting out the noise of the street. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. Inside the car, it was quiet. The air conditioning was blowing cool air. The dog sat on the passenger seat, his paws tucked under him, watching the man. The man started the engine. The dog braced himself, expecting the car to drive away fast, expecting to leave someone behind. But the man didn't drive off immediately. He turned to the dog and extended his hand. The dog leaned forward and licked it. The man smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said. He put the car in gear. But instead of speeding away like the other owner, he drove slowly and carefully. Every time he turned a corner, he glanced over to make sure the dog was okay. The dog looked out the window at the passing city. He saw the park benches where he had slept. He saw the restaurants where he had begged for scraps. He saw the cold, hard streets he had walked alone. But he was seeing them from the inside of a warm car, sitting next to a man who had stopped the world just to pick him up. The dog laid his head down on the center console, resting it just inches from the man's leg. He let out a long, deep sigh. It was a sigh of relief. It was the sound of a heavy burden being lifted. He didn't know where they were going, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the destination. He was with the man, and that was enough. The car pulled into a quiet garage, and the heavy door slowly rolled down, shutting out the noise of the city. It became silent and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic streets the dog had been wandering for weeks. When the man opened the passenger door, the dog didn't jump out. He sat there, looking around, terrified that this was just another stop and that he would be told to get out and leave. But the man didn't say, "Go." He extended his hand and waited. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you inside." The dog hesitated, then carefully placed one paw on the concrete floor of the garage. He followed the man into the house. It was warm inside, and it smelled incredible like wood, clean linen, and safety. The dog's claws clicked softly on the hardwood floor. He felt out of place. He looked down at his own dirty paws and then at the pristine floor, and he tried to shrink into himself. He didn't want to mess up this nice place. But the man didn't seem to care about the floor. He only cared about the dog. He led the dog straight to the bathroom. The dog's heart started beating faster. He had seen other dogs get baths in backyards with freezing cold hoses, and it was always a scary experience. He tried to back out of the room, but the man gently closed the door and turned on the water. He didn't plug the drain or fill the tub. Instead, he tested the water temperature with his wrist, making sure it was perfectly warm. He picked up a handheld shower head and turned to the dog. "It's all right," the man whispered, kneeling down on a towel on the floor. "This will feel good." The man was incredibly gentle. He started at the dog's paws, letting the warm water wash away the layers of dirt and grime that had coated the dog for weeks. The water turned brown as it swirled down the drain. Slowly, the man worked his way up the dog's legs, his hands massaging the sore muscles. The dog stood frozen at first, trembling slightly, but as the warm water soaked into his fur, he began to relax. It didn't hurt. It felt like a warm hug. The man used a generous amount of sweet-smelling shampoo, working it into a thick lather. He scrubbed it behind the dog's ears, under his chin, and all the way down his back. For the first time in a long time, the dog didn't smell like garbage and fear. He smelled like flowers. The man took his time, rinsing every inch of fur until the water ran clear. He didn't get annoyed when the dog shook water everywhere. He just laughed a quiet, deep laugh and wiped his face with a towel. When the bath was over, the man wrapped the dog in a giant, fluffy towel. He didn't just rub him dry. He burrito wrapped him, holding him close to keep him warm. The dog leaned into the man's chest, closing his eyes. He felt clean. He felt light. Once dry, the dog looked like a completely different animal. The matted fur was soft and fluffed out. The red, irritated skin on his neck looked soothed. But they weren't done yet. The man brought the dog into the kitchen. The dog's nose twitched as he smelled something delicious. The man poured fresh, high-quality dog food into a clean ceramic bowl. It wasn't table scraps. It was a real meal. He placed the bowl on the floor. "Eat up," the man said, leaning against the counter and watching. The dog didn't have to fight for this food. He didn't have to eat it before another animal stole it. He took his time, chewing slowly, savoring every bite. He felt the nutrients filling his body, giving him energy he hadn't had in months. When he finished, he drank from a bowl of fresh water until his tongue was cool. Over the next few weeks, life changed in ways the dog never thought possible. The days on the street, where every hour was a struggle to survive, faded away like a bad dream. In this house there was no struggle. There was only comfort. The dog slept on a soft bed next to the man's bed. At night, if he had a nightmare about the park bench or the speeding cars, he would wake up to the sound of the man's steady breathing. It calmed him instantly. The man took him to see a vet, a kind woman who checked him over and gave him medicine for the tics and the aches in his joints. She said he was going to be fine. The man stroked the dog's head while the vet spoke, his hand resting protectively on the dog's back. It was clear that the dog wasn't just a temporary guest. He was family. One sunny afternoon, the man clipped a sturdy, comfortable leash onto the dog's collar. It wasn't a short, tight rope anymore. It was a leather leash that gave the dog room to explore. They went for a walk. As they walked through the neighborhood, the dog held his head high. His tail was up, wagging gently. He wasn't the skinny, scared stray hiding in the shadows anymore. He had gained weight. His coat was shiny. He looked proud. They walked past the park. The dog saw a bench. For a second, he paused, looking at it. The memory tried to come back, the fear, the abandonment. But then he felt a gentle tug on the leash. He looked up. The man had stopped walking and was looking down at him with a warm smile. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said it all. Asterisk, we keep moving. I'm not leaving you there. Asterisk. The dog took one last look at the bench and then turned his back on it. He trotted forward to catch up to the man. He didn't need to wait on benches anymore. He walked beside his person, matching his stride step for step. Later that evening, they were sitting in the living room. The man was reading a book, and the dog was lying on the rug right next to his feet. The fire was crackling softly in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. The dog let out a long, contented sigh and rested his chin on his paws. He looked at the man, really looked at him. He saw the same kindness that had pulled him from the shadows, the same patience that had waited for him to trust, and the same love that had saved his life. The man reached down without looking and scratched the dog behind the ears. The dog closed his eyes, soaking in the love. He had been thrown away like trash by someone he thought he loved. But that betrayal had led him here. It had led him to this house, this fire, and this man. The bad times were over. The fear was gone. He was home. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a best friend, and he knew that for the rest of his days he would never be alone again.